So we'll start off, get Kyle up here. So welcome, Kyle. Good morning, folks. Thank you very much for coming this morning. My name is Kyle Tidwell. I'm the new team lead at the Fish Field Unit for the pinniped monitoring project. I've been there for 2 years. Today, I will be presenting our draft report that I sent out a month ago. I'm expecting comments to be back by Friday, and we'll have the final data from this report produced by the end of the month in December. Of course, many of you have been at these talks for years. Being the newbie, and being interacting with this community of research scientists for the last couple of years, it's become apparent that the 16-year evaluation that this project has been involved in producing has led to some complacency and some general understandings of the program that may not be new and may not be current and up to date. So if you would, I'd like to provide a little bit of background to this project so that we can more fully understand what some of the evolving and novel data are that I'll be presenting today. First, I'd like to thank the co-authors of the report, Brett, Kristen, Lindsay, and Bjorn. Thank you very much for your help. And I'd like to recognize that this project, going into its 16th year, is the amalgamation of my predecessor, Robert Stanzel's work, and an entire army of other techs, volunteers, and core employees that have collected these data. So with that, let's look at some history. Interspecific competition between humans and marine mammals has been apparent since humans were interacting with these marine mammals. We both want fish. This led to severe depletion of marine mammal stocks. As documented here in this picture in the upper left, you can see Army employees in uniform killing adult male stellar sea lions in Ilwaco in 1896. This led to severe depletions of marine mammal stocks worldwide. Specific to our problems here in the Northwest, pinniped stocks were heavily depleted. 1972 Marine Mammal Protection Act helped to effectively buoy these stocks back to manageable levels. In 1980s, as many of you are aware as fish scientists, Bower locks, poster child of Herschel, the California sea lion, led to a review of the Marine Mammal Protection Act because this conservation success story was taking act and these animals were coming back in force. That provided some management objectives and some management abilities to be able to work with these recovering stocks. Fast forward to 2000s, and at Bonneville Dam, my predecessor, Robert Stanzel, started to notice that we had California sea lions occurring at the dam. They were consuming salmonids. A 2000 biological opinion led to implementation of the USA's monitoring program to evaluate and fulfill objectives of the RPAs 49 and 69, how many fish were being killed, how many pinnipeds were out there, and what deterrents could be implemented and what was the efficacy of these deterrents. Between 2002 and 2006, the level of predation, level of animals increased, leading to the states, the wildlife managers of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho to pursue removal authorization through the Section 120 that was established via the Ballard locks, where you can remove individual problematic sea lions. The states have removed and continue to remove and operate under that 120 authorization. In 2016, it was renewed, and they are currently operating under that to remove only California sea lions. Now again, to dig deeper into the history, and so that we can more fully understand some of these data, it's important to understand that we have 2 species of sea lions at Bonneville Dam, and the life histories of these species will help us better appreciate the differences that we note in our data. So let's understand who these 2 players are. The smaller of the 2 variety and the darker is the California sea lion. These are males that we see in the Columbia River system. If you note the map on the right, image by ODF and W, you'll see the crosshatched sections down near the Baja California-Mexican border. The blown up portion you'll see is the Channel Islands. These are the breeding rookeries. Males go down there in the late spring. They form polygynous aggregations of harems, breed the females, and then disperse from their breeding grounds, presumably to decrease intraspecific competition for prey resources. So the males that we see moving up and down the Alaskan to California border in the late summer through fall and winter are transient males that are foraging, trying to recoup their energy stores. Of the males that come into the Columbia system, we get 7%, according to ODF&W, that actually come up to Bonneville Dam. Now that is in opposition, in some ways, to the life history of our second player. The male Steller sea lion, you'll see on the figure in the left, has breeding rookeries up and down the west coast. NOAA recently listed the eastern DPS as non-depleted and is no longer under ESA protection. Therein, there are no boundaries against management of stellars, similar as there are no boundaries against the California's functions as the states, as the managers could be managing them. What we'll note is that the rookeries being dispersed as they are lead to more Steller sea lions being dispersed up and down our west coast. Again, studies from ODF&W indicate that of the males that come into the Columbia River system, 90% of them are from the Port Orford, Rogue Reef, Southern Oregon rookeries. Now, the males that are coming in and coming up to Bonneville are in some ways more habituated to the Columbia River system. On any given day on the South Jetty, there will be between 100 and 300 Steller sea lions year-round, whereas the California males are more transient, moving up and down the coast. The Steller sea lion here that you'll see, branded of course, he's going to weigh in at about 1,500 to 1,800 pounds. So larger animals, more local, and becoming a bigger player at Bonneville Dam, as we'll see. Understanding the differences in these life histories, then we'll talk about some of the data and who is collecting these data. Now, our players on top do their job very well, catching fish. Moving counterclockwise, you'll see the wildlife managers, primarily Oregon and Washington, have floating traps with boats where they can capture sea lions. As a function of their 120 authorization, they place alphanumeric brands on the dorsal surface of these animals, so you'll see C961 there, which allows for individual identification. The deterrence and efforts to deter these animals from foraging at the dam's tail race take place by the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, CRITFIC, which utilize boats to push them downstream, and then USDA, under contract to the Corps, provide dam-based hazing to push them away from the dam's immediate face. Far right is where the Corps fits in. This is the Fisheries Field Unit. We like to say we are the watchers on the wall, and at Bonneville, I guarantee you, winter is always there. We have the ability to see from the dam's face which animals are there and what predation is occurring. So we're able to monitor and accomplish our two goals. How many animals are there? How many fish are being killed? We do this by using field glasses to do visual estimations. You'll see the upper left picture of a bunch of male California and Steller sea lions that are hauled out on Tower Island. To account for abundance, as well as other metrics of abundance like residency and recruitment, we do daily point counts across each of the tail race faces that you'll see downstream of the image in the center, the aerial. We're able to look at where these animals are hauled out, count each individual, and then come up with a daily maxima number of animals out there by species. Predation, monitoring, and estimation occurs via visual observation of each of those yellow tail race areas. The predation occurs in these tail races. We're able to observe it with field glasses. Trained biologists then identify which species were killed or depredated and which species of sea lion was doing the consumption, as well as, if possible, which individual California sea lion or Steller sea lion consumed that fish. So the states and the managers can then come in and do removal and management efforts. So the predation estimates that I'll present today have two different data sets, one of which is novel that nobody here has seen before, because in the fall and winter of 2017, we were requested by NOAA to start to track and provide estimates of how many fish are being killed during this fall time. The number of Steller sea lions that have been at Bonneville Dam during the fall and winter have been increasing, so this prompted action. Using a power analysis and a priori information from the last 16 years, we developed a modified sampling design based on our spring and historical sampling efforts to sample Monday through Friday when there were 20 or more Steller sea lions or pinnipeds on project. We elected to sample only at one tail race, and we elected to do so at the priority tail race that we knew would not have wintertime maintenance and therein would continue to pass fish throughout our study period. Based on our power analysis, we elected to sample 4 random hours per day. that is a reduced sampling design that would still provide confidence intervals that we felt were sufficient to satisfy the region's request. Now, similar to that, in the traditional springtime, January through May, we evaluated as we have for the last 16 years, Monday through Friday, all tail races randomly sampled, 4 to 20 hours per day. 4 to 20 hours based on daylight hours and based on animals' presence. Both of these estimates for fish predation were accomplished and calculated using a probability sampling design of a bootstrap systematic random sample wherein our strata was 1 week of all daylight hours within that week that could be sampled, the number of hours that we did sample into the all daylight hours, which then allowed us to provide a mean estimate of that strata's consumption rate. This accounts for all unidentified fish catches and allows us to account for the hours that were not observed due to our sampling. So first, we'll look at the abundance metrics. Here you'll see a bunch of stellars hauled out, and I'll remind you that these abundance metrics are the daily maxima for each species of sea lion that we observe throughout the year. You'll see on the left the number of sea lions. Across the axis of the X, you'll see between July 1st and the end of June. We base the X-axis on the seasonal presence of these animals. And you'll see that the California sea lions, with the 10-year average being in gray, show up in March and are peaking at the middle of May and gone by the end of May. This coincides with the spring Chinook run and historically has been when we've had pinnipeds at Bonneville Dam. You'll note that the black line of 2017 California sea lions shows that we had far less California sea lions this year than we have relative to the average. The stellar sea lions on the bottom, however, show a 10-year average that is much higher than California sea lions in both the temporal distribution and the total amount of animals that we see. In 2018, you'll see that, albeit relatively stochastic and variable, we're harboring or holding around 20 animals every day at Bonneville Dam. So things have changed. Now, due to the stochastic nature, the variable nature of those daily counts, it might be best to look at the median abundance. How many animals are you going to have any given day on the dam? What animals are you going to run into? And you'll see that from 2002 to 2014, California sea lions have been essentially traded or have flip-flopped with stellar sea lions. So stellar sea lions are now the most common animal on the dam. Predation estimates. I'll first present the fall data, which is the novel data set, capturing from August when the animal showed up through December 31st, and then we'll look at the spring or the traditional data set. I'll remind you that these predation data in the fall and winter are exclusive to Powerhouse 2 tail race only, occurred when there were 20 or more stellar sea lions present, and are the estimates that we can produce by fish species. When we look at this plot then, start on the left and follow with me. Number of fish killed across time from August 15 to December 31, with the number of pinnipeds in the dashed line across, showing where that 20 animal mark was for our threshold. You'll see that we only had 9 weeks that we could sample when we had 20 or more animals. And of those 9 weeks, early in the fall in September, you'll see that the dark black, being Chinook, was the primary fish that was being consumed. Between October and November, we had 4 weeks of constant 20 or more animals where we could sample. Surprisingly here, you'll see that coho composed the majority of the consumption, as well as sturgeon in the hatch line above. In the late winter of December, we see that it was steelhead primarily composing the consumption. If we look at this numerically, you'll see on the left the species of fish. The passage sampled, again, only at the Washington shore, because we were sampling in Powerhouse 2 tail race, and only for the weeks when they had fish counts for the weeks sampled. We'll see that there were 55,000 Chinook that passed. We estimate around 401 Chinook were consumed, which equates to 0.7% of those 9 weeks were consumed. For coho, 12,000 fish, 370 fish consumed, 3.1% of the coho passing were consumed. Steelhead, 1.5%, but more on that because of how we break up the species of steelhead or the varieties. And then sturgeon, surprisingly, relative to traditional springtime surveys, 238 were consumed. Looking at the springtime passage then, we must note how fish passage chronology overlaps with the ability of the predators to access those prey. Look at the black line, you'll see the 10-year average of all salmonids combined passing Bonneville Dam in the springtime. The gray line shows this year's distribution of passage. You'll note that we had a delayed run. Everybody knows this based on yesterday's talks. This coincides with the pinniped's ability to impact these prey items. The 10-year average of black shows the consumption of both California and stellar sea lions. The gray shows this year's consumption. The late run led to a delayed impact, but more importantly, the majority of the pinnipeds left by the middle of May, therein allowing the tail of that run to escape predation. Numerically, we see that the California sea lions in gray, the stellar sea lions in black. Stellar sea lions are now consuming more salmon than the California sea lions are. The two aberrant years in 2015 and 16 are of interest because the California sea lions were chasing large smelt runs and large springer runs. By numbers, you'll see Chinook, again, all passage of the dam this time, 1.6% of the Chinook, all steelhead 5.3%. Lamprey numbers are still coming in. But winter steelhead, we are able to now assess a minimal impact for winter steelhead because we have that November fall and winter sampling period through the March 31st. And this is a minimal estimate because it was only at one tail race, but we see that 5.2% of the winter steelhead were consumed. So, deterrents to try to qualm some of this predation. Sea lions in your fish passage window and in your ladders, not good. Sleds, sea lion exclusion devices to keep them out of there, work really well. Hazing devices from CritFic and USDA using cracker shells to move them out create, if you follow in the map to the right, from Powerhouse 1 around to the spillway, you can chase these animals around, proverbial game of cat and mouse. What do we know? We have expanded temporal presence of these animals and more animals of some species relative to others, more stellars than California's now. They are still consuming throughout their 10-year average here for a number of stellar sea lions. These are data you've seen in that traditional springtime period, but now we're seeing this for the number of pinnipeds. And as they are here now, 11 months out of the year, we're seeing that this springtime consumption of the Chinook is occurring. You also are seeing summer steelhead being impacted, winter steelhead being impacted, but more importantly, during that November to March timeframe, when you have low passage numbers of salmonids, we're seeing sturgeon, winter steelhead, different varieties of winter steelhead, and chum salmon being consumed in the tail race. With that, I'd like to acknowledge the army of folks that have put this together and allowed me to present a very nice data set. Our collaborators, my contact at the bottom, and as a picture is worth 1,000 words, I'll leave you with that and ask for questions.
Questions?
Do you know if the states will apply for a lethal take of stellars in the future?
I can briefly discuss what the management agencies are doing. Willamette Falls recently received their 120 to ODF and W. We provided analysis that allowed them to have slightly different requirements of that 120 than what they are held to at Bonneville Dam and what we have to provide for data. So they have a 120 at Willamette Falls. These animals are only transiting 60 river miles to go between sites, and we're able to note that the same animals do trade between Willamette and Bonneville on a weekly basis. Federal legislation that would allow for stellar sea lion control is currently being worked through the Senate and the House, and we will have a outcome of that if it gets passed prior to the January 3 sunset of the Congress.
I have a question over here. You mentioned consumption of winter steelhead. Do you know some fraction of those quote-unquote winter steelhead are actually summer-run steelhead that are post-spawn, that are moving downstream and not upstream?
I think that post-specific impacts and run-specific impacts are a key piece to fleshing out what the true impacts to these runs are. We have not been able to diagnose what portions of these runs are being consumed yet, but it is on our radar, and we believe that with collaboration with our other agencies, we will soon be able to provide run-specific impact analyses.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. So you showed that the California, it seems that the California sea lions and the still sea lions they are competing with each other. So because the population are replaced by the by stellar sea lions, the California population is replaced by the stellar sea lions. So and you showed that the total abundance fish consumption by these species. How about the rate of fish consumption are different among the two species? California.
Repeat that, Shuba, the rate of what?
Rate of fish consumption.
The rate of fish consumed?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first piece smacks at a hypothesis that there's competitive exclusion between California and stellar sea lions. We don't have any data to support that, albeit there is some quasi-competition for ideal foraging locations. Stellars being there does not deter Californians from being there. If anything, it is the state's removal that are decreasing our residency rates of these California sea lions and making the stellars the most prone to be seen, observed, and counted. And of course, recruitment that is occurring, which there's been several studies recently that show that recruitment is occurring at a higher rate. As far as rate of consumption per fish, we do not directly assess that. We report how many fish are consumed and how many animals are there. However, the states do have some gray literature that they hope to be working up that would provide consumption rates. CritFic also has some data on that they're working with a functional prey response to determine rate of consumption.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.